The Kansas City Current have been dominating the NWSL all season. Is there a single team that can stand between them and championship glory? We're going to try to find out this week. Welcome to this week's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. It is Wednesday, August 27th. We are long overdue for a deep dive into the Kansas City Current as they seem destined for the NWSL Shield. And the major question is mostly, how did they achieve this? And what does it mean for the postseason? Let's jump in. So there are 9 games left in the NWSL regular season. That's right. We are down to single digits, and it feels long overdue on this show to take a longer look at the league-leading Kansas City Current. They have a 12-point lead atop the table, which is the largest at any point in any NWSL season since North Carolina finished 15 points ahead of second place in 2018. We're talking generational dominance from the Kansas City Current. They have not clinched the Shield yet. It's actually crazy to me. They actually haven't even clinched playoffs yet, but it is starting to feel with every passing week and every result that they do not drop that this is their year to walk away with the Shield. And probably we have to consider them the front runner for the double, just like we saw with Orlando last year. So Kansas City was good last year, right? We know this. They were sort of in that 2-team race for the Shield against Orlando. But what changed this year? What has come together for them? Is it just the season at large, what other teams are dealing with? Is it different things that they have done on the pitch? What does this mean for sort of the legacy of this team as they shoot their shot for the Shield and then want to progress into a championship, which, as we know in the NWSL, is still kind of the be-all, end-all, despite a Shield being an incredible accomplishment? Can they keep this going? And I find the Current's changes, these slight kind of incremental changes from 2023 to 2024 to 2025 to be very interesting, because I do think that this project, the 2025 Kansas City Current, is the product of big changes and then small changes, because there are things that they're doing better this year. It is not only outside circumstances that is seeing the Current take this next step. As everybody knows, they had a rough year in 2023, but they've been very, very good since last year, that undefeated streak. But they did also hit that hard wall against the Pride, as people might remember. They had a high-profile loss to the Pride in the regular season. There was a little bit of bad blood between Orlando and Kansas City during some of those games. Everybody remembers the Marta moment in the semifinals, sitting down 2 Kansas City center backs with one move. A really good season by Kansas City that at the national level, the way that it ended, unfortunately, was more defined by just falling short of what Orlando achieved in kind of high-profile fashion, rather than kind of looking at it as an incredibly good season, which was second best at a very strong at the top year in the NWSL last year. This year, we talked about the point difference, but they also lead the league in goals scored. They have the fewest goals conceded. Their depth has been incredibly difficult to contain. It feels like they're doing a much better job of handling injury this year. They have the ability to change games with coming off the bench. They're having more dexterity with their starting 11 this year. And they're setting up their more technical players just like last year, because as we know, Kansas City has the reigning MVP. I think we're going to see some Kansas City players earning individual hardware as well, which I always feel like for an NWSL team, winning is everything, right? But I also think if you're doing that while not only seeing players like perhaps like a Claire Hutton get more shine at the international level with the US, right? You're seeing other players like I think Temwa Chawinga is in that conversation and should be the front runner for MVP again. I think if you're hitting on all cylinders, an NWSL team is winning, but they are also setting up individual players to achieve goals beyond even what they're doing at the club level. And also, we must admit that this season is a little bit different than last season. As everyone remembers, last year it was these 4 teams that were running away with the league. You had Orlando and Kansas City neck and neck. Orlando isn't as sharp this year. They're having a little bit more trouble with consistency. As we also know, they were just hit with some pretty devastating injury news, with Barbara Banda being out for the rest of the season. And none of the other chasing teams started consistent enough, I think, to make a serious push for the Shield. Kansas City started hot and have stayed hot. And that's carried them throughout this regular season, where we're seeing other teams like Washington or San Diego or even, Portland or those kinds of teams. We're seeing them make these pushes, which is good for postseason. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But they didn't have the consistency from the very beginning to really be able to challenge what Kansas City has looked like from day one. So all of those things go into a historic winning year. But we also need to focus on what Kansas City has changed themselves and what they have worked on internally from last year to this year. And I would even say this is a process that goes all the way back to 2022, where they were a certain type of team that was very exciting, very inconsistent. They get hot. They make it to the NWSL championship in 2022 before being kind of like sat down by the Portland Thorns in that championship game. And the biggest difference this year from last year, probably not the first person to say this, is their defense. Their defense has improved significantly. And with that, I think we need to talk about the presence of head coach Vlatko Andonovski. The club has been under Vlatko's management since the beginning of 2024 after, as I said, a rough 2023. They're good in 2022, real big drop off 2023. They come back in 2024 under Vlatko Andonovski's management. And it's taken some time for Vlatko to shape the current more into his style of football. And I also think it's fair to say that when he took over the team, there was some hope that he wouldn't change the team too much. As we know, Kansas City, when they struggled, were this sort of kind of quick, swashbuckling, like really fun style of a football team, end to end, very open. They were going to be going 110% for 90 minutes. Goals would be scored. They would also be conceded in kind of incredible fashion. And no matter what, you would have a blast. Kansas City is one of those fun, bad teams, even when they were struggling. Or you see them get hot, like in 2022, and you go, this is not all put together yet, but they go on a string of games and you go, this is like the hottest ticket in town. I want to be able to see this team play because no matter what, they're going to be fireworks. And you don't want a manager to change that too much, especially in the pursuit of these incremental gains. Andonovski is known as a defensive whiz. That is his calling card and has been ever since he was leading, FC Casey to championships in the early years of the NWSL. He also managed a very solid Seattle team, and both of those teams had very high floors despite a lot of fluctuating talent just because of the volatility of those early years of the NWSL because of Vlatko's commitment to foundational defense-based football. Were his teams always the most exciting to watch? Not always. Were you always wondering kind of about what their ceiling would be? Absolutely. But their floor was high because the way that they approached games was a very balanced, and we're going to probably reference this a lot, warriors and artists ethos. This is something that Andonovski talked about with his club teams. It's what he talked about with the U.S. We'll talk about the U.S. in a second. And it is also how I think he has helped construct this Kansas City team to be more foundationally sound without giving up some of that technical versatility and, that sort of incredible things that we see someone like Temwa Chawinga do day in and day out. He wants those brilliant on-ball technical players that you don't even have to be a soccer expert to watch them and go, that is an incredible player. You go back to the very beginning for him, I think Lauren Holiday, as we all know, is sort of the calling card of those FCKC teams. But he also wants a holistic group where more system players can thrive and support the rest of the team. You can't just have this kind of back and forth, really go, quick end-to-end type play. You also need to have your warriors who are there to make sure that your technical players are able to succeed at the right times. You saw that philosophy almost again to a fault. It was all warriors, no artists. You saw players struggle with confidence. They didn't feel like they were playing with freedom. This U.S. team, which actually should have been a great fit because there was a lot of that sort of ebb and flow where you set certain players up to succeed and be great while also having them be backed up by incredibly hard workers, full team defense. They became a low margin, incremental gain sort of a team. Their midfield struggled greatly to progress as technical footballers. They struggled with the other team having a game plan at all. There's a lot of set pieces and white knuckling it. And yes, by the end, very good defense, but not much else. Very tactically rigid team the U.S. was during those years. And they tried to win a World Cup basically on the center back duo of Julie Ertz and Naomi Girma and throwing Emily Sonnet in the midfield and saying that triangle is going to carry us all the way to glory. It was a slog. It went too far. I don't even think it was Andonovski at its best. It did not match the way the U.S. is meant to play. And as we all know, it ended very poorly, which made you wonder when he returned to the NWSL if he could turn this high risk, high reward team into something that's still fun to watch, but also can put together an incredible campaign like the one that we're seeing this year. And it didn't happen right away. Casey last year still fell into those tendencies of opening matches up. They really met their match with Orlando, who played last year very similar to how Kansas City is playing this year. You need that high achieving defense as the foundation of a long season where you can get both the Shield and a championship. And Kansas City's success this year, even after a player like Alana Cook goes down with a season-ending injury, is a good example, I think, of what makes Andonovski a good club coach. Actually, I'm going to go so far as to say a great club coach. This return to Kansas City has really cemented that, but also why he struggled as the U.S. Women's National Team manager. He has not had to completely revamp this roster. They have been doing a good job in Kansas City of making big splash signings while also kind of quietly bringing in some of these league veterans who know exactly how to execute NWSL play every week. But he's gotten so much time to implement those ideas day in and day out. People remember Kelly O'Hara said this year, right, that she didn't feel like she learned anything from Vlatko in an international environment. And that does make sense to me without even taking away from the club's success. He's not the type of manager who is necessarily good at stringing things together because you have to be really versatile as an international manager. You don't have a lot of time with these players. You are kind of stuck with what you are given talent-wise. You have to have clear ideas and bringing new talent in. It's not about drilling. And you saw him try to drill the U.S. over and over and over. It felt like they were playing the exact same game over and over and over again with the idea that maybe eventually they would do it correctly and in a way that could consistently win them games. But he can do that in Kansas City. You're seeing good habits being formed through long drilling, consistent styles, a lot of training time. He can't just take these kind of simple ideas, put it together, trust players to be themselves, and go out and win games. It needs to be something constructed through long periods of work. And that is actually, again, on the positive side, what we've seen from Kansas City this year. And when I keep talking about sort of quietly, sort of not revamping the roster, but you're starting to see the pieces come into place. Anyone who is familiar with Andonovski's management in the NWSL before the U.S. job, those little players that maybe aren't your Temwa Chewingas or your Dabinas or even someone like Michelle Cooper, but someone like Nichelle Prince. Alana Cook is a good example. They picked up Rocky Rodriguez. I'm sure a Swiss Army knife like Haley Mace is already Vlatko Andonovski's dream player. He does like that versatility. He likes people who understand the ebbs and flows. He likes people who will get stuck in and play full team defense and can support the skill players like Chewinga. And as we know, Chewinga is the best skill player possibly you could ever have. And you add in those players like Lola Bonta or youngsters like Ali Settner and Claire Hutton. And Kansas City is just better, frankly, at controlling games than they used to be. And so I think you can attest it to, yes, like I said, long drilling, Andonovski having time to really implement those defensive foundational ideas with the idea of turning that into offense. But you are also just seeing this really nicely balanced roster of those warriors and those artists. And then, as I keep saying, you have the greatest artist of all, which is Temwa Chewinga, who, for my money, we still have 9 games. Maybe something's going to change. It's the front runner. She's the front runner for MVP. Again, she should go back to back. It's just not even close, especially, unfortunately, with the injury issues that Barbara Banda is going to face for the rest of the year. The fact that Dabinia, who as a teammate, it's incredible that you have both of these players playing so well, but Dabinia has also had a couple availability issues this year. High skill, on-ball players, and Chewinga is the supernova that makes all of it work. It's not just that she's the most effective striker in the league or that her motor is endless or that she's faster than 90% of all NWSL defenses or even just her ability to receive the ball with such technicality. The way she's able to turn a ball that she is receiving into positive motion with just 1 or 2 touches, usually in the air, incredible. The way she frees up space for herself. But she also has that ethos of off-ball defending that Andonovski loves. She, even when she's hurt, and sometimes you can tell that, so, the engine's running out, she's running out of gas, but she's making those cut-in runs. She, a lot of times, is there to receive service from her own defensive third because that's just the level of ground that she covers. It's a match made in heaven for most teams. I don't think that you have to be a genius to make Temwa Chewinga work in a system, but this is how you end up with historic success. Is all of the other pieces plus a player like that. And then again, yeah, you add Dabinia, you add Bia into that, you add the development of Hutton, you add someone like Setner or Cooper, you have someone like Kayla Sharples, talk about a warrior, like those kinds of players in your back line. They just got Gabby Robinson back, which is very exciting. And this is how they're cooking. This is how Kansas City turns into something really, really special. So I am explaining all of this is to say I'm explaining something that has almost already occurred, which is we are all anticipating Kansas City's Shield winning season. Seems all but destined. But can they turn it into the double? Can this become a championship team? And do they have to be is maybe the larger overarching question of why do we in the NWSL still really prioritize a championship over a shield, where in many cases, especially with the sport of soccer, the shield is the dream for many teams, or the equivalent of the shield is the dream for many teams across the world. But here, we love a championship. You only get to raise that trophy if you are able to be perfect in the playoffs. I like the expanded playoff structure where everyone's playing a quarterfinal. I think Kansas City should like it too. I think the bye is not good for anybody. But now you start to go, okay, who could even stop them? Who can stop Kansas City? I think it's very similar to the conversation we were having last year with Orlando, and ultimately the answer was nobody. So who can take KC down? And this becomes a tactical question as much as a personnel question. Washington's very dynamic, right? And they're arcing into their best form at the right time. Or San Diego is very dynamic. I think they could play Kansas City straight up and it would be incredibly interesting. You know, Portland can do a lot of things, especially if they do sort of open games up, right? Even Gotham on their best day. Or you have the teams who are pretty comfortable going negative, and that can also win you single elimination games. Kansas City's last loss in the NWSL came at the hands of the Seattle Reign, the Let's Go Negative champions of the NWSL. This was back in May, but the Reign packed, intense numbers into the midfield and the defense. They took 2 shots on goal. They disrupted, they gummed up the KC offense, and they put just enough pressure on the KC defense to get a slim win against most statistical odds. Sometimes Andonovski gets a reputation for kind of being too negative or overthinking things. I think he really meets his match sometimes in Laura Harvey. But that is absolutely one way to play this if you're going into a match against Kansas City. Sometimes it's not always the most fun thing to watch, but sometimes that is how you get the job done. You go negative, you put numbers behind the ball, you give Temwa Chawinga no space. You probably put in enough aerial balls to really kind of test that center back duo, make them make good decisions, try to force them into some of those mental mistakes that they were a little bit prone to last year. Maybe you walk away with a win. But Washington, San Diego, Orlando, they're going to want to play KC straight up. And I think they should try. I think that would be great. I mean, Orlando, frankly, if they did not just lose, which is, again, devastating, if they did not just lose Barbara Banda for the rest of the season, I do think that playoff game would be incredibly interesting. They contained Kansas City really well, even that scoreless draw, which we know was marred with the heat delay. But when they played each other a couple weeks ago, Orlando really contained. They did the containing part for Kansas City. And that's step one, as we know. They were not able to turn that defense into offense. And especially now that they don't have Banda available, I worry about their ability to strike back. But that is the way that you do it. You basically play like Kansas City, but better in that one game. But for Orlando, with their number one attacking artist, for lack of a better term, gone, I just don't know if that's going to be the same caliber of matchup if they were to play each other in the postseason. Washington, it's a little bit different. I think Washington can absolutely score against Kansas City. But the Spirit's flair for the dramatic a little bit actually reminds me of Kansas City last year with the late game heroics and the utilizing of width and having to maybe come back from kind of these adverse game states at the end of games. Not always, it's a hard line to walk if you're in single elimination. But as I said, the promising thing for the Spirit is that it really seems like they're getting better every week. And so this might be the team that is kind of coming into everything at the exact right time to be able to handle a whole game where they're able to score early, knock it into that adverse game state, and hold on long enough against what Kansas City is able to do in their counterattack. San Diego also really interests me. I think that they are too early maybe in the Jonas Eidevall project to be able to put it all together right now against a team like Kansas City who has had multiple years to work on their style of play. I fear that the Wave would struggle to score perhaps in a single elimination game against Kansas City. But it's all very interesting. And I think that we're in a good place actually with the NWSL this year, with even though we don't have 4 teams running away with everything, there are a lot of really interesting propositions if you kind of put all of these teams, let's say in the top 6, up against each other. So it's hard to say. I think that a team could go real negative against Kansas City and turn this in again to just a huge slog and get the job done. But I also think there's a couple teams that I would encourage to play the current straight up, see what you can do, and really put the pressure on Kansas City's defense to finish the assignment, as it were, in being more consistent than they were last year. So will we see Kansas City and San Jose at the championship game? I mean, honestly, probably. I feel kind of positive about that. They're not unbeatable at home, but if they do go in with the number 1 seed, they're going to have that home base for the quarterfinal and the semifinal. They're probably not going to get nuked by a quarterfinal bye. And their performances in CPKC at home are so lived in. It is a very difficult place for other teams to come play. The fact that Kansas City had to travel to Orlando for that semifinal last year, I think, was a huge disadvantage for them, which is why he locked things up in the regular season. I just don't know if I see them losing at home in the postseason. What does that mean for the neutral site championship game? No idea. But this is maybe where I kind of have to close this, which is we're talking about a team that has had a lot of consistency over the last couple of years. They've had a lot of investment, both in like on-field resources, but also in just making sure that they have the staffing necessary to support what they want to do. They've been empowered to go get those big splashy signings, but also just play it smart and reward talent with coming in and playing on this really good team. And I think this is how ownership investment manifests. I think sometimes it's the big stadium, and sometimes it's the new, development team, and sometimes it's the larger training facility, but sometimes it's just the routine. And I think in women's sports, we see teams not always feel like they have the benefit of having that consistency off the field to then develop it on the field. So all of which to say, it's a huge kudos to Kansas City for what they've been able to do tactically, how they've managed their roster, how they've grown in their versatility and their consistency. But all of that happens with resources. And it's nice to see for a team that has so many of these big headlines of all of the things that they're doing, to see it also showing up on the pitch. Feels like a match made in heaven. The Late Sub is part of the Just Women Sports Network. This show is written by Claire Watkins and produced and edited by Parker Fenton. To get more of your favorite women's sports content, subscribe to the Just Women Sports newsletter and follow Just Women Sports across all your favorite channels.